Speaker, on May 11, 2016, longtime Tarion reform advocate Barbara Kaptein wrote a memoriam for the late Dr. Earl Shuman, may he rest in peace, a man whose generation-long battle with Ontario's builder puppet home warranty program ended when Mr. Shuman took his own life. The memoriam informs of a community brought together by a system of enduring consumer protection failure. I will read it to you now. Remembering Earl Shuman. The tragic circumstances surrounding the passing of Earl Shuman last week are one of the reasons I decided to write this piece. For those who didn't know him, he fought for 27 years to rectify injustices he saw in the Ontario government monopoly, Tarion Warranty Corporation, and the abysmal access to justice problems faced by ordinary people trying to get their homes fixed under Tarion and the Licensing Appeal Tribunal. Earl took on the legal establishment by challenging the lunacy of some Tarion case law and its heavy-handed use of the justice system. He explained one of the absurdities to me in this way. If you buy a new home and install a 24-karat gold toilet in it, you're the builder of the home under law because you contributed more than a certain dollar amount to the home's overall value. So even if you're a dentist, you can be deemed a builder under Ontario law. He called this the Shuman test fraud. Many cases have been decided since his own case years ago following this principle, which sounds like something out of George Orwell's Animal Farm. I met Earl Shuman and his wife at Queen's Park several years ago at one of the many meetings to try to bring transparency and accountability to Tarion. Real reforms have not been made to this government monopoly in over 40 years. Builders' interests are best understood by policymakers. Consumers are often labeled unscrupulous troublemakers, whiners, or malcontents who wouldn't be happy with the Taj Mahal. Builders, on the other hand, are politically well-connected. They have the loudest microphones, the deepest pockets, and lobbyists and lawyers to make their views well understood by policymakers. Earl was engaged in a Sisyphean task up against these Goliaths, rolling a huge rock uphill only to have it come crashing back down on him each time. He didn't play by the rules, but he often tried to. Many of us who are accustomed to crusty, irritable, feisty figures learned with time how to read him. He was a rule breaker, rubbed many people the wrong way, but he knew that nice, polite people seldom bring about real change. He attended a Tarion Review Town Hall meeting a few weeks ago. When he saw me come in, he motioned for me to sit down next to him. He brought a well-used copy of the Ontario New Home Warranties Plan Act, which Tarion administers for the public on behalf of the government. He read from it to the attendees, ministry lawyers and officials present. He pointed out the intent of the legislature was not to have the law drift so far away from its consumer protection intent. Since Tarion makes its own regulations with oversight as thin as a spider's web, we knew this was flawed, outdated legislation. He knew this was the 900-pound gorilla in the room. He drove from Cobourg the night before, suffering from a cold, paid for his own hotel room to attend the impossible weekday timing of the meeting from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. He tried to keep his years of anger and frustration at bay, tried to keep his cool. He did. Giving me a big hug when he left, he thanked me for being there and contributing. I wrote him a short email afterwards saying he'd done well under what we all knew were difficult circumstances. Earl wanted these injustices to be exposed by the media in a sustained and front-page way like the press covered the Gomeshi, Ford and Duffy scandals and various messy society divorces. Journalists often told us that they wanted sexy stories. This was a decidedly unsexy story until you buy a new home and find out how flawed and outdated the policies are which govern this important financial decision in your life, buying a new home. Earl asked me last November to keep a file of all the documents relevant to his 27-year work and correspondence with senior officials. A few times he said, now eerily meaningful to me, that he wanted to make sure someone would take his work forward and all these years wouldn't go to waste. If something ever happens to me, he said several times, I assured him I have well-organized files, not as extensive as his pool table full of documents, but all his years of work wouldn't be lost. He'd from time to time email me and ask what I thought of a letter he'd sent to a top official, or what I thought of a Supreme Court of Canada application, for example. He'd say to me, see if you can spot the game-changer words in my document. Anyone in our communication groups who'd worked on Tarion LAT issues could pick out these words. Earl knew every nook and cranny of the legislation, the criminal code, all the legalese, the doublespeak, and the political games. He used to commiserate with me how hard it is to write to politicians and journalists, how achingly long it takes to craft a persuasive, well-researched email and wait endlessly for no answer. Many of us struggled with this without the benefit of PR people, legal advisors, and researchers. All we have is our sense of right and wrong and our kitchen tables. Over the years, Earl became an expert at clear, well-documented, persuasive writing. Though his style was lengthy, he mastered it. I suggested he write a book and use social media to his advantage. The press was obviously not covering these problems in depth and in a sustained way as he knew they deserved. He looked forward to his retirement in a few months and promised he'd do more work when he finally had more free time. Then you will really see me fly, he told me in February. A few months ago, he retired. He attended the Tarion Review Town Hall meeting on April 5th, his birthday, and according to his wife, Krista, he descended after that into a black hole of frustration and despair. The news of his sudden death and the circumstances surrounding it, described to me by his shaken wife, caught me off guard and made me cry like a grade school kid. Earl's story is heartbreaking and complex. He worked on justice and consumer protection issues for almost 30 years. Many of the injustices he exposed are still festering, some getting much worse. To many consumers who continue to suffer under builder bias policies administered by a monopoly claiming it's protecting consumers, while protecting the builders it's supposed to regulate. Earl and Krista drew together a communication group of concerned, determined consumers to fight reforms to Tarion, the LAT, and justice. All of us will make sure his 27 years of work were not in vain. To the Ministry of Municipal Affairs housing official who inquired several months ago why these issues were so urgent, "Did anyone die?" she asked. Well, actually, yes, someone has. Barbara still gets emotional when she talks about Earl. She has said that fighting Tarion is a life-changing experience. That experience ended Earl's life. Speaker, Earl was right in saying that the life-ruining failures of new home warranties don't attract sustained front-page headlines, but we do hear the stories from time to time. In fact, Earl's own story was covered by the late Christy Blatchford in the National Post on September 15, 2015. It turned out to be a prophetic story, published a mere 8 months before his passing. Earl's story began with the hope of so many new home buyers. She wrote of Earl when he was a newly minted dentist establishing himself in Eastern Ontario. He decided to buy a house, his first and, as it turns out, his only one. Until that point, he'd lived in bachelor apartments and even a shed. He was intending to buy a resale house, but spotted a parcel of land out in the country north of Cobourg, Ontario, with expansive, lovely views, and realized he'd have to find himself a builder. Like so many of us who hear the frustrating stories of Ontario's new home warranty victims, Miss Blatchford was left with many questions. She asked, why did Tarion, which is supposed to police illegal builders, never prosecute the ones who operated illegally for decades and built, among others, Shuman's house? Why did a series of lawyers and judges sanction the now disgraced Shuman test, which against all common sense deemed the dentist the builder? Why were there no court reporters for at least a couple of the court proceedings? But it is the end of her story that is most chilling. His odyssey really has been Kafkaesque, particularly Kafka's short story called Before the Law, about a man from the country who prays for admittance to the law. Its gates stand open, but there's a doorkeeper, and he won't admit the man from the country, so he stays there waiting for the okay until he dies. Speaker, learning about new home warranties in Ontario has felt like being unplugged from the Matrix. We've seen that movie, and awakened to an ugly reality. The reality that we live in a province with only a veneer of new home warranty protection. And when problems arise, the system meant to protect can become the enemy itself. Speaker, Earl's story is so compelling that when this government's former MGCS minister declared Tarion to be broken in Port Hope, he did so with Earl's widow, Krista Shuman, at his side. But with the benefit of 44 years of hindsight, has this government finally fixed Tarion? Ms. Shuman relayed her profound disappointment on this bill prior to second reading. My family was hopeful for long overdue change when the 2017 report by Justice Douglas Cunningham and more recently by the Ontario Auditor General Bonnie Lysyk only a few months ago were released. These reports clearly indicate the dysfunction of Tarion because of its monopoly and its preferential treatment of the home building industry over Ontario homeowners, with thousands of legitimate claims ignored and dismissed. The impact of the Ontario government's inaction and its lack of oversight has been devastating for many families. It is extremely disappointing 1 year after the former minister's announcement of their promise to correct Ontario's new home warranty program, and that not enough has been done. Through Bill 159, the Ontario Conservative government had an opportunity and also a duty to protect Ontario families in the most important purchase that homeowners make. Our government has failed to protect us from building code violations and the impacts on the financial, physical and mental health of Ontario families, including my own.